Hi everyone, welcome to eLearnChat, where talk, it's knowledge. And today we've got with us Dr. Karl Kapp. He is joining us from Danville, Pennsylvania. And we had some Skype problems before, so we're moving ahead quickly before we get cut off. How you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing really well. How about yourself?
I'm doing great, except Good. For Skype sometimes. I'm usually well. Here's our intro, and then we'll start. And we are back. I came back fast.
Did.
So what's been doing in your life? You were on about 3 months ago, and we had a lot of Skype issues on that call. This one's different. I think we have a good connection. But
I think we do.
You had just done some fun stuff with a webinar. With a seminar and Poll Anywhere. That was pretty fascinating. Have you done anything since like that?
Well, I've been doing a number of webinars using kind of Poll Everywhere and doing that kind of interactive story telling and nonlinear keynotes. So that's been going really well. It's always interesting to me to kind of set that up, because everybody says, well, can't you just use, our classroom software? But the problem is they tend not to segment by questions. And Poll Everywhere lets me segment, and that's how I divide them into teams. So you can't really have competition unless you segment into teams. So that's kind of the issue that sometimes that I run into. But it's been, school started, so we're back at school. So that's been really kind of a hectic time to get started. And I'm out still promoting my book, Play to Learn. So that's been a lot of fun. Yeah, we're doing a workshop in Chicago coming up, and then for the online learning conference, Sharon and I are doing a 2-hour online workshop, and so really excited about the kind of uptick that book's gotten and some of the reactions. It really lets people now, walks them through the steps of creating their own learning game. So I'm very excited about that.
That sounds fun. Play to Learn, is that available Kindle and everything else?
It is, yeah. Kindle is published by ATD.
Okay.
And it's available on Kindle. It's on Amazon. It's available through ATD. So if you're a member of ATD, you can actually get a discount. So we just got the number. So it came out in March, and by June it sold over 670 copies. So apparently that's pretty good sales for that time period.
Good. Well, we'll start publishing it or publicizing it, because that's fun. I'm looking forward to it. I'll be ordering that tonight. So I didn't know you had the new book out. So this is good to know.
Yeah. So Sharon and I, we have been doing a workshop together for about 3 or 4 years. And one day we're like, people always ask us for additional information, and we have a workbook that goes with it and all that kind of stuff. But it seems like almost no matter how long the workshop is, we don't have time to go into the depth that we'd like to go. So we said, well, why don't we put together a book, and that way if people want more information or want to revisit something or want to go look at something again, they'll have all of that in one place. And so we sat down, and she took some chapters and I took some chapters, and next thing we know, we had a book, and really helping, and we're finding it's really helping people to figure out how to create game-based learning. And actually a colleague of mine, he works for a company, he's getting his PhD at a university, just emailed me the other day and said, hey, guess what book is required reading in our class? I'm like, yay.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah,
well,
that's been a lot of fun.
Now that I know about the new book, that gives me some questions to ask you. Play to Learn. Let's start with a different approach. I'm going to start with a negative first, only because this is something I hear a lot when we talk to people. A lot of people say gaming didn't work, it wasn't good, it took too long, it was more expensive, blah, 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 blah. What are some of the negatives you're finding in the industry with let's say gamification or gaming, or educational gaming per se? What's causing all these people to have so many problems?
Right, that's great. I was going to say, first of all, I agree with all those problems that people have had. So one of the issues is that people are divorcing the game mechanics, or game dynamics, really. So mechanics are the rules, but the game dynamics is how you win, from what happens on the job. So, for example, everybody says, well, let's put a timer on it. Let's make it a timer like a game. Well, if your job doesn't require you doing something within a certain amount of time, then making a game to teach you about your job where you have time limits just doesn't make sense, right? It's incongruent with the learning outcome. The other thing we find is that a lot of people will go and take a well-known game like Jeopardy, for example, and just plug in content and say, yeah, we have a game. But really, if you think about what a game is good for from a learning and development perspective, it's really good for teaching problem solving, critical thinking, strategizing, and that's not an easy game. You can't sit down in 15 minutes and make up a game to teach somebody how to allocate resources. That really takes some effort. So I think a lot of people are shortcutting the effort that it takes to actually create those games. And then finally, people are just throwing, they're taking like Monopoly and they'll just say, oh, we'll just add our content into the Monopoly structure. Again, not really thinking that, hey, Monopoly might not be the best way to teach, ethics, for example. So you really need to match the core dynamic of the game with the core elements of what you're learning and really kind of work those together. And too many times that doesn't happen. And then the other issue is somebody will see, Halo or Uncharted, and they want a game that looks like that. Well, good luck. That's a few $1 million, actually $10-20 million, and you're not going to be able to do that. And then people miss, like, card games can be effective for learning. Board games can be effective for learning. So you don't have to go right to digital. And I think that's a little bit of a disconnect in the industry.
So in essence, like everything else, the games are out of context.
Right. Yep.
It's people see games and go, "That's really cool. Let's put it into the training." And I've seen that before. I've even seen cases where, in fact, we were asked to do this once. They wanted to do a game, and we go, "Okay, what do you want?" Well, we want this 100-question game. 100 questions? No, that's not game. That's torture. What are you doing? Well, we want to test their knowledge. I go, that's not a game. And they go, and 100 questions. Now you are truly, you're the Marquis de Sade of training. What are you doing? And they just didn't get, well, isn't that gaming? No. I mean, it's interactivity. You're asking a question, but that's not anything that would engage or make people like you. And they agreed to do 25 questions. I was going, oh, gosh. And we did. We had to do a 25-question, quote-unquote, game.
Yeah, I had a similar situation where they wanted a digital board game so you could play against someone else, and the person said, and I want the players to land on every square of the board. I'm like, that's not a game. That's a linear progression through content. Like, I know. Yeah, but we want them not to miss anything. I'm like, well, let's not use a game. Let's use like a more realistic way to do that.
When you say that, we did a thing for ASTD Tech Knowledge when it was about probably 5-6 years ago, maybe about 6 years ago. And we created an immersive training piece for a talk that we were doing for Adobe at the time. Well, that was seen by a very large networking company, and they wanted us to do the same thing for them, but with their content. This was like an adventure game, free form. You went from rooms to rooms, and you just got things handled. We didn't keep track of inventory, though we could have. It was just more going from a room to another room and clicking on people, interacting with different things, from paintings on the wall to things on windows. And they loved it. And it got a lot of attention. So this big networking company, which I'll remain unnamed for now, but it was a multi-billion-dollar company, and the HR department got involved, and now the learn as you go became you have to go through every room, and you have to be forced into every room, and if you miss a room, you can't go ahead, and you have to click every item in every room, or you can't move forward. Well. Okay, this was for a large diversity course, and it wound up, nobody took it. Nobody had interest in it. They all hated it. And we warned them, they're going to hate this. They're absolutely going to hate this. No, it doesn't matter. They have to go through everything. So the game became the drudge. It was like, we hate this game. And what do? You warn them ahead of time. You write emails so that they don't, I didn't hear you. No, it's an email too. Right. And they just said, no, we want everything touched, that you can't go around anything. Well, that's not fun anymore. Now it's boring. It's mandatory, and now they're frustrated because things they may have skipped, which they could always have gone back to, now it's mandatory. They don't know what's important anymore.
Right.
Part of the fun of the game and of those things that you touch. And we patterned the game after, I don't know if you remember this, but there was something in the early 90s called Just Grandma and Me.
Yeah.
It was a great kid game. Our daughter, she was 2 years old, just adored that thing. But fortunately, I was bigger and I could push her off and I could play it. So that was actually good. But it was a fun game. It was all exactly like that. It was this little critter, I think was the name of the characters. And they would go and touch everything. You'd touch a rock, boom, something would pop up. You touch something else. There was a lot of engagement, but you had no idea what it could be. And to a certain point, it was also kind of dynamic because it wasn't always the same thing happening. So it was a lot of fun. We figured, hey, we could do that. That would make a great e-learning game.
Right.
If only.
If only. Right. Yeah, it's funny how those things get in there, and they want a game, but then when it comes down to it, they don't want a game, but they want the construct of a game. And then, unfortunately, that's where, the negatives that you talked about earlier come up. We played a diversity game, and I hated it because you had to click on every single thing, So it really, I think, moves it into the wrong direction. The other interesting thing I find sometimes is when I'm creating a game and they say, oh, this is great, but can it also do this, and this? Like, no, it's designed to do this. If you want to add all these other things, it's not the same game anymore.
That's funny. And you know what? That's people being creative, except
it is.
The budgets are limited. They don't have unlimited budgets. And when they see things like you said, like Halo or Call of Duty or whatever major game is out there, you're talking $5 to $50 million budgets. Yeah, and they go, we have a $10,000 budget. I go, yes, you do. So buy some time on a PlayStation and have fun.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Because that's about all you're going to get out of this. I mean, when their expectations are high, it's really hard to bring that down because, well, I've seen games. They're so cool. Why can't I have that? Right. Because one, it's not your industry, and two, it's really out of your budget. If you had the budget, sure, you could have it. I mean, if you look at things like USDA and the military, they have games we would all die for.
They do.
But they're called simulations, and they're very realistic. But they're so realistic that, I mean, if they don't know what they're doing, they can get killed. But the thing is, they spend $10, $20 million on some of those. And that's a lot of money. I mean, look at the average flight simulator for an airline. You could almost consider that a game, but it's basically an exact replica in really capsule only, like the cockpit only, of a real plane. And I've known pilots who've been in them, and they say, when you first get in and you crash it, it really bugs you. It's he goes, you feel it. He goes, all of a sudden your plane's pointing down and you're shaking and vibrating. He goes, and then of course they pipe in on some of them like screaming passengers, and he goes, it really psychs you out. But the thing is, what they said was it trains you how not to make those mistakes, really. And much better they make the mistake in a simulator than in real life. But I think a lot of companies don't really get the fact that gaming could be very effective in what you said, in context and in the right form.
Right. And I think you hit on another point, not even related to gaming, but most companies, the training is not practice. They don't look at training as practice. They look at it as giving information. But if we look at every high-performance skill set, like and life and death, like training, like military, even if you look at like sports, these guys, I always give the example, the people that play in the NFL should already know how to play football. That should not be a doubt. So why are they practicing every single day? Because they're honing their skills. They're learning to work together. They want to do it automatic. They don't want to think about the route. They just want to run it. Yet in a lot of organizations, we don't take the time to allow people to practice over and over and over again. We just tell them once or twice and we're done. And I think, to your point, that's where games could really, really help. They could be this safe environment to practice your skill over and over and over again.
That's a great point, because you're right. Most companies have big curriculums, and part of that curriculum is, let's say you're on the phone and you have to deal with customers. You have 2 or 3 exercises in an hour, you're done.
Right.
And you move on. And then they go, I wonder why our customer service reps aren't as good as they could be. That's an excellent point, because they're not using that as you can go in anytime and retake this. They're using it as, here's your curriculum, here's what you have to do, here's how you take it, you're done.
Right.
Go forth and conquer. And it's tough because you're right, you don't have the practice. I was watching a video the other day. This was from Sweetwater, the music company. They're a large music reseller. They sell all the instruments and all sorts of stuff. And this was by a very famous drummer who drummed with a lot of big rock bands and other people, and he's also a studio drummer. And he goes, every day I practice for 40 minutes. And we're thinking, okay, this guy's been drumming for 40 years. And he showed his practice. You would not believe it. This is a master drummer who not only knows drumming, but all the acoustics of how drums and other instruments work together. His practice. Da 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 da. And it's basics.
Wow.
It's pure, absolute basics. And they asked him, why this? And he goes, because that's everything.
Yeah.
He goes, if you think you know everything you're doing and you don't practice those 4 beats, 5 beats, 6 beats fast every time or slow sometimes, he goes, when it comes time to actually doing it, you're going to miss it. And this is a guy 40 years playing professionally. I don't know who, probably 10, 15 more years when he was a kid. And he's incredible when you watch him drum. And yet, da 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 da. And I was sitting going,
a great story. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah.
And it was wonderful to hear that because it comes down to that and everything. It's practice. Practice makes perfect. I teach martial arts on the side, and a lot of people say, how do you get good at martial arts? I go, practice.
Practice, right.
Well, what do you mean by practice? Doing it over and over and over again until you don't think about it. And then you do it again, because that's how you get good at it. If you don't practice, you'll never be good. Look at the Olympic athletes.
Right.
They just, the high jumper jumps and jumps and jumps and jumps, and every so often goes a little higher and higher and higher. And it's amazing. They just do it until they can't. And but that's what makes people good at anything they do. And for some odd reason, in the world of training and e-learning, people think there's a shortcut.
Yep. Yeah. Well, especially I was just talking today to a group about micro-learning, right? So that's, all the rage. Let's do micro-learning. Let's do micro-learning. And there's so many things you can't learn from micro-learning, right? There's deep dives you need to get into. It's hard to connect the dots. It's hard to get the big picture. It's hard to problem solve, critical thinking, all that kind of stuff. But all these organizations have latched onto micro-learning as like the cure for all the learning ills, and that's not going to be at the same time they're sending out micro-learning. At the same time they're scratching their head like, how come these people don't understand critical thinking? How come our people aren't problem solving? Because you're giving them fast food learning.
That's funny. And of course micro must be small learning, so therefore it's more efficient. We don't have to spend as much. Let's do it. Exactly. It's interesting. What do you think about the role of blended learning?
I think blended learning. I think learning should be a process. So I always say it's a journey, not an event. And I think blended learning can really help in that journey toward mastery or toward learning. It provides different ways, I think, of approaching the knowledge and the content and kind of mixing them together, almost like I think we should take so many lessons from like the entertainment field, right? So they call it transmedia, right? So you read a comic book, you see the Star Wars movie, then there's comic book. It's just comic books about Star Wars, and then there are action figures about Star Wars, and there are posters about Star Wars, and you kind of get the message. And I think blended learning can be like that. It was just looking the other day. There's 4 prequels to Blade Runner. 4 like mini movies that fill in the time gap between the last Blade Runner and the movie. What a great idea.
Interesting. I didn't even know they had. I remember watching the original Blade Runner. I never think I watched the sequels, but the prequels, that's interesting. But they weren't major movies. They were just, like you said, mini movies. That's interesting.
And The Matrix did that too. They did a lot of prequels, filling out like how Morpheus, got out of the Matrix, and they had comic books, and it's just people don't always have time to see a movie, or don't always want to look
Right.
through a comic book, or don't want to. So giving them lots of options, I think, makes sense. And again, in training, sometimes we tend to limit the options. So blended learning, I think, is a good way to help expand options.
Now, it's funny because a lot of people complain about the millennials in the workforce and how they don't produce, they're lazy, they're this, they're that. I don't totally agree with that. I've met some millennials that are incredibly focused and excited about what they do and passionate, and then some that suffer from some of the stereotypes. But also, I think it's partly I call it more a parental issue than a millennial issue, and two, the school system isn't training them exactly well sometimes, especially in the lower and middle school areas. But when they get into the workforce, they seem a little. I think shell-shocked might be a good word for it, because all of a sudden now they've got deadlines, they've got to produce, they've got to do this, that. What do you think, from a millennial point of view, and you're a teacher, so you see this, what are their strong and weak points for an organization?
Mm-hmm. So that's a really interesting question. So I see them in graduate school. So they've self-selected into graduate school. So that group tends to be pretty highly motivated, although every once in a while we'll get people that I'm wondering what you're doing in grad school.
Sure.
But one of the interesting things is they always seem to have like multiple things going on. So I know a couple of millennials graduated and they like started side gigs already, and they're doing lots of side stuff. So
Sure.
I think that multitasking is really valuable to the organization, because they can take that into their organization and kind of expand the knowledge set. I find a great deal, like they're always saying, "Hey, Dr. Kapp, have you seen this? Have you seen that?" So they seem to be very curious about information and kind of what's happening in the tech world. So I think that's good. Sometimes it amazes me. I teach a class where they have to dress up in a suit and give a presentation and all that kind of stuff, and I get a lot of trepidation about that whole process. And for some of them, it's the first time they've ever purchased a suit.
How funny.
So I find that really kind of interesting. That wow. And I took a few to DevLearn one year. And one of them turned to me and said, Dr. Kapp, this is the first time I've ever been on a plane. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well. So I think that they bring a lot to the table in terms of curiosity, in terms of wanting to do things. I think they understand, the world. They have friends all over the world. I don't know that they're always as worldly or tech savvy as sometimes we give them credit for. Using technology is a little different than actually working with technology. So even though they're comfortable with it, they might not know how to use a particular piece of software or how to do something. And I think sometimes boomers and Gen X, we assume certain things about about that generation, millennials, and we're not always right in our assumptions.
I totally agree, and I find some of them, like you said, very curious. If you can engage them and get them involved in your curiosity, they can usually hop on pretty quickly. Because I'm one of those people. I'm very curious. I love life. I mean, I've been around for a long time, and I haven't lost that joy of living, if you will.
Right.
And learning new things. There's always something new to learn.
Always.
And if you can convey that to the young ones, they usually kind of get it. Not all, we've had some that were just hopeless, but we've had others that went like, wow, that's really cool. I can do that. And they get into it. And they start realizing that there's so many opportunities to always do better. I always say, you know what? Don't be happy with mediocre. Be happy with better than mediocre. Be happy with good. And then try to get great. And that's just working at it. And most of them go, okay. And a lot of them have never heard stuff like that. They're like, really? Yeah, you can be better. You can do whatever you want if you really focus on it and if you really have the skill set. Yeah, unfortunately, I've also run into a lot of people who get into fields because they think it's cool, and then they find out they have no skill set in it.
Right.
And I go, you just spent $100,000 getting a degree in something you're not that good at. I know. What do I do? You have to consider your options.
That's a problem.
And it is a problem, and it happens a lot. It's sort of a painful realization, and it happens. part of it, I think, is a school problem because they allow people to get in that they know aren't really that good at it. And the teachers never really tell. I say teachers, not all. There's some very good teachers who do tell them, but won't tell them, you know what, maybe this isn't the field for you. And I would always eclipse that with, or at least preface it with, you know, whatever I'm telling you is my opinion. And I could be totally wrong, but I want to tell you through experience, I've seen a lot of people who do what you do, and I've managed a lot of people who do what you do. Think twice before making sure this is what you want to do. Look at your skill sets, do an analysis and say, do I really have what it takes? And be honest with yourself, because you're making a long-term commitment to money and to a career. And a lot of them don't really get that question ever. I mean, even when they're getting into school, the schools just tell them, oh yeah, you're going to make $300,000 a year. Okay, good luck. And we've seen that. We've seen counselors tell kids whatever, and you just go, oh man, you know, good luck with that. It just doesn't happen often.
No, it doesn't. And that's why I like the field of instructional design and technology. You know, I tell students any one of the 5 elements of the ADDIE model, analysis, design, development, implementation, that's a job. So there's got to be something in there that you might like. Although I've had conversations mostly with students that don't seem to like other people. So I'm like, you know, if you don't like other people, this is probably not the field for you, because there are other people involved. You know, it's group work. It's, you know, because we do group work because you do group work in the field. You know, so that I've had those conversations. Not always easy, but fortunately in instructional technology, instructional design, there are a lot of options that a student could pursue, you know, from very technical to very analytical to, you know, sit down and just crank it out. So that's kind of, you know, a little bit of a fortunate situation that instructional technology. The problem we run into is, you know, nobody in 5th or 6th grade says, when I grow up, I want to be an instructional designer. Like, never happens. So try to explain to people what our field's about and what you can do with it and what the career options are. You know, that's kind of difficult to explain to somebody.
You know, it's a good point. Every time you fill out a form online for whatever you're doing and it says, what's your occupation? And you look for it, it's never there.
It's never there.
I've never seen anything that said e-learning or training. I've seen training and it says K through 12. I think, oh, that's not me. Or this or that. And it's funny. It doesn't really have any presence as something separate, even though a lot of people do it separately. They do it as a career. Though I have to admit, I think of all the people I've ever met in the e-learning world or in the corporate learning world, most of them didn't come from that arena at all. They just sort of fell into it, or somebody said, hey, have you ever taught anyone anything? Well, yeah, I kind of taught those people over there how to do this. Great, you're now in our training department. Okay. And hey, have you ever written a course? No, but I can read instructions. Cool. You're now in the training department. And that's how a lot of them fell into it. Now, mind you, they've fallen in love with it since then, and they understand it. But getting into it originally, very few people come out and say, I want to be a corporate trainer. No,
it's not a widely known field.
No. And how do you see, for example, people getting into teaching? I hear a lot of people saying, I want to teach kids, little kids, but I don't hear people saying, I want to be a college professor. It's interesting. They want to work with the little ones, but not the big ones. It's and do you find that even, like, for example, in the college you work at, people wanting to be teachers?
Not so much. I mean, actually, the enrollment in people wanting to be teachers has gone down substantially because, you know, I would say the assault on education in the United States, but. I think that people aspiring to teach in the corporate world or training world, they fall into it. They don't realize it's a career. You know, you see a teacher, you know, K through, you know, high school or college, so you kind of know what they do and kind of see that as a career option. And you don't really see what people do training in a corporate situation, so you don't really even realize. I remember thinking, I read a book, What Color's Your Parachute? And that was the first time I ever realized, oh, people teach inside companies. Wow, that would be pretty cool. So, you know, it's just not widely known for whatever reason.
And it's interesting. I remember reading that book when it first came out, and I was going, what color is my parachute? I like a lot of things. This is tough. But it was a good book, and it got people thinking about some of those things and what to do with that stuff. And it was, and then they came out with different parachute books, but it was an interesting series. And I don't know if they still give those kind of tests in school. I'm sure they do, of, what your aptitudes are and stuff like that. When I was in high school, I think it was in the 11th, it was either 11th or 12th grade, they gave us an aptitude test on what we're good at. And mine said, now get this is funny. For me, knowing me then and knowing me now, it said I would be good in radio, TV, broadcasting, and speaking. And I was like, I hate speaking. I'm terrified of crowds. I'm terrified of public speaking. I like to watch TV, and radio is cool, but why would I be on radio? I don't have any, none of that. So somewhere in my, mid 50s or early 50s, I started getting into broadcasting, radio, and I was going, what happened? Where did those 35, 40 years in between go? That was weird.
Right.
But it's funny, that aptitude test hit it right on the spot. And I went in, studied engineering for a long time. A year before I graduated, I went into business admin and IT, and that's where I stuck. But never ever thought I'd really like media like I do, even though I do writing and I do instructional design and we do development. It's funny what tweaks everybody, and I didn't believe it for 1 second that test was even halfway correct.
Right. So, and now it turns out to be, very interesting.
Yeah. It's like I had like 30 years of stupidity, and it was like, hey, this is fun.
I should have listened to this test.
Yeah, that test was good. Place. Darn. Right. Wow. Yeah. But usually I've taken other tests that were really like totally off. And so I thought this one's probably totally off too, because it was really that far off in left field, especially this is back in the early 70s. It's like broadcasting TV? No. I mean, you had to be really a broadcast TV guy to do that. And the skill sets are different. And
they are, yeah.
And then, but like anything else, you have to develop those. People aren't born broadcasting; they're not born doing TV work or acting or anything like that. You have to work at it, like with anything else. Sort of like people aren't taught to be teachers. You really have it in you, and and that's part of the fun of it all. Now, I've got to ask you a personal question. Do your students kind of think, "Oh man, I got a cool professor here"? Because you're not the normal professor. You're pretty different. I mean, you and I have met several times, and I keep saying, man, I wish I had you as a professor in school. I would have been so much more motivated. And do you get that from them?
I mean, every once in a while, I'll get one of my students said to me the one day I was doing something. He goes, "Yeah, I'm going to ask." Oh no, he said he got in touch with Connie Malad.
Yeah,
and he wanted to do something with her. I'm like, oh, I know Connie. I can kind of set you up. And then we're in a meeting. He said, yeah, Dr. Kapp's Uber networking skills enabled me to, meet with Connie. So I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. And then, the fact that, they see me at a conference or something. Oh, there's, Dr. Kapp. So they kind of like that. My take on it is I want them to be able to see that they can do the same thing. They could do anything that they wanted to in the field of instructional technology or beyond. That's just my vehicle. And if I always tell them, look, if I could write a book, you could write a book. If I could speak at a conference, you could speak at a conference. So I try to use it as a model to say, like when I was growing up, the people that wrote books were like so far away from what I thought, I could do. And then or even articles, but one year, Mr. Mortimer came into class. I don't know, I was somewhere in high school, early high school, and he was so excited because he had just published an article in Field and Stream magazine. And that's when the light bulb went off, like, hey, if somebody in the middle of nowhere, because I felt like I lived in the middle of nowhere, could write an article for a magazine like Field and Stream, wow, maybe I could, And it took years, but finally I was able to do that. So I try to use my professorship and my work in the industry really as a model for the students to show, look, you could do this too. So I have fun with that, and I think they have fun. Although some of them, one of my classes is pretty tough, so I have gotten some less than stellar feedback because it kind of
you made me work.
It's hard.
Yeah, you made me work. That's horrible.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I know. There's a really good school out here that does a lot of media training. It's a good university, and they have people from the industry who do After Effects, who do Photoshop, Illustrator, and the After Effects guy is really, really hard. And he tells them, if you want a job in the industry, it ain't easy. You're going to have to work at it. And they're like, no. And but he's honest with them. He says, I'm going to kick your butts because when you get out there, they're going to be harder than I am. Right. So you better get used to this. And he said, if you're good at it, it's not going to bother you. You'll be just good at it, and they'll treat you like any other professional. But if you're not, they're going to start kicking you. And he goes, you don't want to be kicked. So he said, better be kicked here than over there. But that's good because, you are doing, I think, a great service. And one thing I really do like about you, too, is that you're very open. You're very open about sharing. And that's another thing I just love about the way you are is you do share. You give the students, let's call it hope, because a lot of students have no idea where they're going afterwards. And you give them a little bit of hope. Hey, anybody can do this. It's good. It's up to you. Go for it.
Right, and I try to expose the myth of, natural talent just gets you where you want to go, and you just get noticed, and you just I'm like, no, it takes work. You can do it, but it takes work. And I always tell them, try to be as valuable outside of your company as you are inside of your company, because it's amazing how that raises your value inside. Even if you never want to leave, act like you're preparing to leave, because that really increases your value internally. So, but it's fun. Students are great sources of energy.
That's really good advice. Well, Karl, we are once again at the end of our time. We've gone pretty long, actually, considering we started late. So, as always, it's a real pleasure seeing you and talking with you. Are you going to DevLearn by chance?
Pleasure seeing you. Unfortunately, no. That same week is Maisie's conference, so I'll be actually at Maisie's conference. So Michelle Obama is keynoting at that conference. So, and I'm doing a conversation too. So I'm opening for Michelle.
Okay, interesting. Well, wait, good luck on that.
Me and like 20 other people, so it's not really me. But
that should be interesting.
I'm very excited to hear what she has to say. Yeah,
that sounds good. Well, we're going to be at the DevLearn conference this year. I think we're going to be filming there, maybe doing some live shows, so that should be fun.
Okay,
But let's definitely keep in touch. I will be buying your book and letting everybody know. Oh, I love reading good stuff, and I'll let everybody know that I know. We'll put it out in our blogs and stuff like that. So
thank you
again. Have a great one. We look forward to seeing you soon. We'll probably see you again next year, I'm sure. And,
absolutely.
And have a great rest of week. Take care, Karl. Thanks for coming on. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks.